Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this, what has become an ever-evolving trade chess match between the United States and China, the latest move, following the talks in London, appears to be a rare moment of calm, a ceasefire, if you will, in the high-stakes economic standoff that's been building quite literally for years. So yes, a deal has been struck, but don't be fooled, this isn't peace. This isn't an agreement that will last years. It's just a pause during which the world supply chains are still walking a very, very tight rope. It all began when rare earth took center stage. Our deal with China is done, announced President Trump on Truce Social. He said the deal that was made in London is the end of the latest trade flare-up between the United States and China, which was, of course, the direct result of his own policies, of his own decisions. After intense negotiations in London that lasted 2 days, China agreed to resume shipments of rare earth elements and magnets to American manufacturers. Hours later, the Wall Street Journal confirmed that Beijing would issue export licenses to U.S. companies. And this is seen as an immediate relief for American industries that were quite literally on the brink of disruption, mainly here the top automakers.
What is the challenge that you see in some of these talks?
Yeah, well, I think it's similar to a couple fighting through a divorce process, right? So the two parties don't see each other in the future, but then at the same time, they still have to live with the consequence and how to divide up the assets. I think, just now, Rebecca and Robin mentioned about the rare earth, and also at the opening, you mentioned about the progress at the London talk isn't as smooth as it should be. It is because, the counteroffer from the US part is probably too low, too sort of not good enough for China. All right,
So why does this matter? Well, because rare earths aren't just exotic sounding metals. They actually power everything from EVs to fighter jets to missiles to wind turbines, smartphones, you name it. So this agreement didn't come out of nowhere. It followed months of tit-for-tat escalations. Earlier this spring, China rolled out a new licensing policy to control the export of 7 critical rare earth elements. And that was effectively done in response to Trump's new trade tariff regime. The new export policy seeks to bolster national security, according to Chinese officials, but unofficially in Washington, it actually was perceived as retaliation for Trump's earlier move, which were, of course, massive tariffs on Chinese goods that briefly soared all the way to 145%. Now, at first, the US thought that the rare earth issue was resolved during preliminary talks in Geneva, but Beijing viewed the licensing system as a global measure, not really tied to the US directly. And so that difference in interpretation, of course, lit a fuse, and it was one of the main issues discussed in London. As factories in the United States began running short, for example, Ford even paused SUV production because of this, Washington decided to retaliate with new restrictions on semiconductors, on aviation gear, even fuel exports to China. It was at that point that Trump and Xi Jinping had their first known official call since Trump's return to office for the second term. It set the stage for the London talks. And while the full details are still emerging, believe it or not, we know this: both sides showed their cards to an extent. For the first time, Washington involved top export control officials in trade negotiations, signaling that supply chains were no longer just economic tools, but strategic weapons. China agreed to greenlight exports of rare earth, but only with 6-month licenses. So this is a quite temporary concession, one that keeps leveraging firmly in Beijing's hand. The United States made concessions too. It agreed to ease some of the recent export controls, and perhaps more surprisingly, it reversed a plan to revoke Chinese student visas, which was a decision that was originally initiated by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, as you might recall. These may seem like small moves, like very, very insignificant steps, but they do represent deeper shifts, quite important shifts. For years, U.S. strategy has been to block China's access to advanced tech, especially anything that is tied to artificial intelligence or military innovation. Why? Well, because China is a peer competitor, and many Chinese hawks push the narrative that China is an adversary, thus denying both sides an opportunity to negotiate and to reach a meaningful settlement. Of course, there is Taiwan issue too, but that topic is purely political, so we won't be covering it today. That's why what we saw happen in London is a readjustment. It's simply a realignment, and it allows both sides to buy time. So what does all of this mean? At this time, it has become quite clear that rare earths have changed the landscape, and now supply chains are no longer quiet background systems. They're actually valuable tools in geopolitical warfare, if you will, in geopolitical process. Beijing used its rare earth monopoly as a warning, and Washington uses tariffs as an escalatory instrument. Washington responded with tech and fuel restrictions, but it didn't really anticipate China to take such a firm stance and to be so assertive. Trump isn't used to this, but he's certainly getting used to it now. This is why Washington effectively blinked first and called Xi Jinping to set up the London meeting. The London Truce lasts until August of this year, so only several months, and until then, tariffs remain. U.S. duties on Chinese goods are locked at 55%. That is hardly a sign of peace, if you ask me. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And this summer, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Chinese Vice Premier Haley Feng will continue negotiations, which is very promising. It's certainly the right thing to do, and they will do so likely in European capitals. But it is quite clear that the underlying tensions haven't really gone anywhere. They've just been put on pause. The United States is still almost entirely dependent on China for certain rare earths like samarium, which is a metal that is critical for missile systems. That vulnerability doesn't really vanish with a 6-month license. Like I said, the London talks achieved a pause and bought some time for both sides. So while today's news offers a temporary sign of relief for U.S. factories and a momentary dip in global economic tensions related to the US-China standoff, let's be realistic and let's not be too hopeful. This isn't really the end of the supply chain war. It's just sort of halftime. It's just a pause, and it is a very small one too. So let me know what you think about the recent US-China developments. It does affect every single consumer in the United States because we are vastly dependent on imports from China. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to show your support. It truly makes a difference. Like, subscribe, and share. Support my work on Substack and Patreon. You will find them linked in the description below. And I look forward to seeing you here tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.